All right, y'all. It's the first week of May. It's apparently the official kickoff of Best Ball Summer. A little bit earlier than I remember it in years past, but I'm here for it. And in fact, something happened on Monday that made me excited enough to bring me out of video making retirement. I haven't done any of these Best Ball videos the last 2 seasons. We'll call it a COVID hiatus, I guess. I've still been drafting. I've still been playing at the same level that I always have. But on Monday, when Underdog Fantasy announced the details of Ball Mania III, and in fact launched the tournament on Monday, the day after the NFL draft concluded, I was excited enough. I was like, this is going to bring in a lot of new players this summer, and I'm back to share some of my thoughts, strategy. And if you're just starting off in best ball, we're going to talk about all the basics. We're going to talk about the structure of this tournament. If you're beyond all that and you just want to get to my player exposures and the live draft that we're going to be doing, you can go ahead and skip ahead. I'll put the timestamps down below. But if you've never played best ball before, let's start with a primer. There's lots of information out there, but the basic gist of it, regardless of what site you play on, I'm going to be talking about Underdog, but it's basically the same strategy and structure across all the sites that offer best ball. The draft. The draft is the whole thing. You know, when you play with your friends and family and, every August you do a draft, you drink some beers, you take some players, and then over the course of all the months of the NFL season, you're making trades, you're working the waiver wire, and at the end of it, someone wins a few $100. Even when you're the winner, I think a lot of times we look back and like the draft is kind of the most fun part of fantasy football. So that's the beautiful part about best ball. That's all you do. Nothing happens after the draft. You draft your players. After that, that's your team for the whole season. There's no adding, dropping, waiver wire, trades, none of that. You draft them, that's your squad for the entire NFL season. So how does that work? Well, how it works is like this. Let's say you draft 3 quarterbacks on your team, okay? In week 1, whichever one of those 3 quarterbacks puts up the highest score, that's going to be your quarterback for the week. So like retroactively, Underdog will say, this was the highest scoring quarterback for you. That was your starter for the week. Now in week 2, it resets. Maybe quarterback number 3 is the highest scoring player that week. They're going to be the one that hits the scoreboard. That's how I look at it, right? So your top scoring players hit the scoreboard that week. The rest, their scores are disregarded. So this is interesting to note from a strategy perspective because I've always thought of like a player like Deshaun Jackson. He's still in the league today. He's quite a bit past his prime. But even in his prime, Deshaun Jackson was either like a 1 catch for 27 yards or 6 catches for 167 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns, right? Like that's always the type of player he's been because he's a field stretcher. He's the fastest guy on the field. And he just seems to be kind of a boom or bust player. And there's a number of guys like this. Well, a player like that is much more valuable, in my opinion, in best ball because the whole difficulty of a boom bust player is when are they going to go off, right? Like you got to decide, I think they're likely to do it this week. I'm going to put them in my starting lineup. In best ball, you don't have to worry about that. If there's 2 or 3 weeks a year where a guy like a Deshaun Jackson hits your scoreboard, awesome. That's awesome. He's going to be contributing. He's probably a player you're going to get at the very end of a draft. And the weeks he doesn't do it, doesn't matter. He's just a 0 like everyone else at the bottom of your roster. I hope that makes sense. If not, when we get into a draft here in a few minutes, I think it'll start to make more sense to any of you that haven't done this previously. Okay, so you go through the draft, and in Underdog's case, it's 18 rounds. So you're going to end up with 18 players at the end of the draft. It's up to you how many quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends you want to take. Of course, there are minimums because there's a certain number of each position that you have to start each week. But then you have to factor in a lot of things. What's the likelihood that one of these players is going to get injured? What's the likelihood that I'm going to need a 5th running back versus an 8th wide receiver? Like these are the debates you're going to find yourself having during these drafts. I'm personally of the opinion, I don't think there's really a right answer. I can't tell you the exact right structure is 3 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. Is that what that would leave? Whatever the math on that is. I don't think there's a specifically right answer. I think there are wrong answers. I think there are people that I see doing strategies that I don't think are optimal. But I do think there are a few different ways you could go and still have a team that can compete at the highest level for the top prizes in this tournament. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how this specific tournament, Ball Mania III, works. As you might be able to tell by the name, this is the 3rd year that Underdog has put on this tournament. It's grown each year. And as I said, there's a couple wrinkles that we're going to talk about to 2022 specifically. Okay, so whenever you want to draft, people have already started drafting. The tournament launched on Monday. It's going to last all the way until either A, it fills, or B, the NFL season kicks off on Thursday, September 8th, I believe. By the way, spoiler alert, it's going to fill. It might even fill like significantly before the NFL starts because I think there's just a lot of momentum behind this product right now. Anyway, it doesn't matter when you draft. It could be 1 in the morning. It could be 3 in the afternoon. It could be the first week of May. It could be the first week of August. The structure is going to be the same regardless of when you draft. So you're going to enter the draft lobby. You're going to enter the tournament. At the time you enter the tournament, you're going to have 2 choices. You can either do a fast draft, or really, honestly, I would just consider that like a standard draft. It just means every team has 30 seconds to make their pick, very similar to the structure you're used to. There is also an alternative, which is to have 8 hours to make your pick. Now, of course, that sounds kind of strange at first, but the idea is that like you're not just sitting in front of your computer and drafting. It's for the people that are too busy to spend an hour doing a fast draft. They want to be able to periodically just check it on their phone and, make a quick selection at lunch or when they're laying in bed. It's not as rushed, I guess is what I'm saying, and you can do it a little more on your own time. I personally am not a huge fan of that style. I actually like the fast drafts. I find that I'm more zoned in a fast draft. And I also find that my opponents make more mistakes in fast drafts. And, I get it. If you're a little bit undecided on which direction your team is headed or what player you should take next, and that clock starts ticking down on you, 30 seconds can actually go by pretty quickly. And I've certainly made some rushed and mistakes along the way in the fast draft format. So I like putting that pressure on my opponents and hoping that they make those mistakes while I get more and more comfortable with the strategies and players that I want to target. Once you've decided what length of draft you're going to do, you enter, and then once it fills with 12 other opponents, the draft begins. So once again, you're going to go 18 rounds, snake style, back and forth. The draft order will be randomly, you'll be put into a random draft spot, and each time it's going to be a little bit different. So you draft your team. At the end of 18 rounds, you have a team, your other 11 opponents have a team, and that's it, man. That's it. You don't do anything else. That team is going to rack up points for you for the rest of the summer. The Best Ball Mania 3 structure is a regular season or a round 1 lasting weeks 1 through 14, okay? So the number one goal, the simplest, most straightforward goal, is you have to beat those 11 other people that you drafted with. And that's what's so great about this, right? Because even those of us drafting in May, a lot of these teams are going to be dust. They really are, because players are going to get cut. They're going to get hurt. They're going to get traded. They're going to get, suspended. There's a million things that could happen between now and the kickoff of the NFL season. The only reason to draft now, and aside from the fact that like you're itchy and it's fun and you want to do it, the only strategic reason to draft right now is because you might be able to put together some teams that you'll never be able to put together in August. And what I mean by that is there's going to be certain players that are like in the middle or bottom of the draft now that people aren't that high on that inevitably are going to rise, right? So that player you can get in the round 7 today might be a round 4 player by August. So if you hit it right and you run pure and you navigate all these injuries and other things and you just thread the needle perfectly, you might be able to put together a perfect team in May that you would never be able to put together later. The odds are against that, but that is the strategy and that's the thinking. Okay, so weeks 1 through 14 of the NFL season are round 1 of this tournament. So you got to finish in the top 2 out of your 12-person league. If you don't finish in the top 2, no money, nothing left to play for, it's over, okay? So if at the end of week 14 you're not in the top 2, that team is dead. There's nothing left. If you are in the top 2, there's a couple things that are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have automatically won $35. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot. Entry fee is $25, but all the funds, all the extra funds are going to the top prizes at the top of this tournament. As I mentioned already, multiple $1 million plus prizes, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But if you make it to round 2, you've made at least $35, and all those teams, all of those top 2 teams from, I think there's like 35,000 leagues will be how many were drafted when this is all over with. All the league winners are going to get combined into new 10-team leagues, okay? But again, all those 10 teams in that league are going to be league winners. So they're going to be very good. They're going to have had a great season. And it's important to keep in mind they're probably going to have a lot of the same players as you. If you think about let's say someone like Josh Allen might have a historic season this year. Let's say he leads the league in passing and touchdowns and he rushes for another, half a dozen more. He's just clearly the best NFL quarterback in fantasy this year. This happens relatively frequently. It's not always quarterback, but there's usually like a dominant player in NFL fantasy football. Okay, you and a lot of other people are going to have that guy because that's what led you all the way to round 2. So now it's not so much about what does Josh Allen do in week 15, because a lot of other people have him as well. It's more about what does your 7th wide receiver do that separates you from the rest of the pack. Now, if you do that and you win your 10-team league in week 15, you're advancing to round 3, and now things are going to start to get a little more serious because now the minimum you can win is $75, But now we're getting just one step away from the finals, which is where all the cash, the real cash in this tournament is. So now you're going to get into a 16-team league. These are not only teams that won the regular season, these are teams that also won round 2 in week 15, just like you. So there's going to be even more player duplicates because now, take Josh Allen out of it. Now let's say a guy like Matt Ryan just randomly has a great week 15. Well, all the remaining teams that just happen to have had Matt Ryan are really going to have a good chance at advancing into round 3. So now it's going to be even more important how you differentiate from the field. 16-team league in round 3, week 16 of the NFL season. If you win this, if you can win 1 out of 16, now you've made a minimum of $1,000. The least you can win now is $1,000, but you got a ticket and a sweat to week 17, which is everyone's goal. This should be everyone's goal who's playing this tournament to make it to week 17. We started this whole tournament with almost 500,000 entrants. By week 17, the final round of this tournament, the championship round, we're down to 470 teams remaining. So it's less than 1%. This is going to be very difficult to do. Even if you max enter this tournament 150 entries, which I will, and I have the last couple of years, it is still incredibly difficult to make it to the finals. But 470 lucky skilled teams will, and this is what they're going to be competing for. $2 million to first, $1 million to second. And again, even if you finish dead last in week 17, you get $1,000 back from that team. Some of you might be asking, can I have 2 teams in the finals? You're greedy. You heard what I just said about how difficult this is, and you said, well, I think I can get multiple teams there. The answer is yes. Theoretically, you can. People have done it. People probably will do it this year. If you get more than one team to week 17, they all play, and you're going to collect the cash prizes from as many teams as you have in that round of the tournament. Now, I mentioned at the top, there was something Underdog did that I did not expect them to do. I actually didn't even think about them doing this. They are adding a $1 million prize for just the highest scoring team in the regular season. This actually makes a ton of sense, but again, it's just not something I've seen in any other best ball tournament. But the reason it's interesting is because of this. So previously we were only playing for the playoffs. That's all that really mattered. So people would actually look at like who's playing who in the NFL in week 17 and try and say, well, if I'm lucky enough to get that far, I want the Chargers going against the Raiders because that projects to be a high scoring game. I mean, it projects to be a high scoring game theoretically in 7 months. I mean, we don't know. It's hard enough to predict what's going to happen in the NFL on a week-to-week basis, much less 7 months ahead of time. But when you're playing for this kind of money, I mean, like, yeah, it should be considered. Like, who are they playing in week 17? However, with this regular season prize, now it's just about putting together the best, most fundamentally sound and highest scoring potential team through weeks 1 through 14, and you can make some money on that too. So kudos to Underdog for that. It's a great wrinkle. Of course, only one person's going to win it. There are no other prizes for regular season. And actually, I don't know how we're going to track this. There's never been any type of scoring leaderboard. I have to assume that's going to be something that they're doing so that we can all keep track and see where we stand amongst our 500,000 other competitors. Anyway, $1 million for first on the regular season, highest scoring team, $2 million for first in the whole tournament, $1 million for second, and even third, fourth, and fifth place are a substantial amount of money. Now, I'm sure I missed some things in this introduction to best ball and this tournament. There's a lot to cover, but I will say this. I'm going to be making these videos throughout the entire summer. I'm going to continue to do live drafts. So if you want to subscribe and follow along, of course, I would appreciate it. Nonetheless, we'll get to all the strategy as the summer progresses, and you can see exactly what I'm thinking and doing with my teams. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the Underdog lobby. You're going to see Ball Mania III right here front and center. Of course, we're going to do 30 seconds per pick. Nice. Looks like this one's just about to start. Yeah, just waiting on 2 people. All right, so we'll get back to this in just a second. But in the meantime, let me show you my results from the drafts I've already done. I've drafted 17 teams so far in Ball Mania III. And you can go here to your exposure, and it will show you all of the players and the percentage of frequency which you have selected them. You can select by position. You can do it by percentage drafted. If you look at quarterback here, one thing that's interesting about player percentages, obviously you're not going to end up with a really high percentage of a player like a Jonathan Taylor or one of a top, top in first round guy, because
The only place you can select Jonathan Taylor is the 1-1, 1-2, or occasionally, rarely, maybe the 1-3. So you're only going to end up with the frequency of drafting that player at the same rate in which you get those draft picks. But towards the end of the draft, you can kind of move around a little bit more. There's a little more flexibility with the guys that you want to target, and you can move up a little bit and get them, or a lot of times they just slide to you, or they're available at the very end. So Davis Mills, great example of this. It's not that I think Davis Mills is going to be a phenomenal fantasy quarterback this year, but I do think he's undervalued, and I'm certainly willing to take him at a higher frequency than my competitors, it appears. One more player to go. So I'll show you a little bit more of my exposure here before we kick this draft off. So at quarterback, you have Carson Wentz and Davis Mills are at the top of my highest owned percentages. Very similar ideas between both of those guys. Josh Allen is my number 3 at 23.5%. So that would be my recommendation at quarterback. I think either you need to target one of the top end guys at the top of the draft. If they make it to you, don't reach for them. Or if not, I would wait until the middle or later rounds and get a handful, 2 or 3 guys that, you think combined will be able to equal the output of a top flight quarterback. Running back, Dante Foreman is a great player, or he was a great player coming out of college that I really liked. He hasn't produced a ton in the NFL, but last year was his most productive season. And I view him now as McCaffrey's primary backup. So, I think McCaffrey hasn't made it through either of the last 2 seasons, maybe 3. And Foreman's probably going to get some playing time. So again, a guy I can get almost every time in the 18th round. And I like doing that. Aaron Jones, obviously there is concern about the timeshare there in Green Bay. And maybe Dylan is going to take over at some point. But I think Aaron Jones is undervalued. And I've taken him a lot in the 3rd and 4th round in the early going of draft season here. See if there's anyone else interesting here. You're going to see a lot of mid-level guys that I'm just kind of mixing in. I think Cordarrelle Patterson's season last year was a bit fluky, but it appears everyone else thinks that too. So he's a little undervalued at this point. And you just take shots on these guys. Same things with Chase Edmonds. They paid him a lot of money to come to Miami. And I don't know if the talent's there for him to truly be a workhorse running back, but he's going to have opportunity. And I don't mind taking shots on guys like that. At wide receiver, you're going to find that I'm very high on the Philadelphia Eagles. I loved the A.J. Brown move. And between him and Devontae Smith and completing the stack with Jalen Hurts, I've been doing a lot of that in the early going here. All right, our draft is about to start. We're going to be selecting from the 1.4. Almost always, I like to go with a running back in the first round, assuming one of the top guys is there for me. You can call it anchor running back, hero RB, whatever you want to call that method. But it really allows you flexibility to either then come back in the second round and get another stud running back and be off to a really strong start in the draft overall. Or if you want to wait and go more zero RB and select a bunch of dart throws later rounds, that's a way to do it as well. So I love being here in this 1-4, 1-5 range. I can still get one of the top guys at running back, but it just gives me a lot of flexibility from here on out to see what happens in rounds 2 and 3. And that really leads me into my best advice for anyone that's new to this. I would not go into any draft with a plan in mind. I wouldn't go in saying, I really want to do a Bill stack. I'm going to get Josh Allen. I'm going to get Stephon Diggs. That's certainly doable. But the thing is, if you reach just a little bit to get Stephon Diggs in round 1 and just a little bit to get Josh Allen in round 2, well, you've completed the stack. But somewhere out there in one of these other drafts, there's going to be someone that takes Stephon Diggs round 1, Josh Allen. Let's say they take another star player in round 2, and then Josh Allen makes it to them in round 3 because they're patient and they don't force it. Well, now they've got the same 2 players you have, plus another great player in the middle that you don't have. So that's one of the main reasons you don't want to reach. And I also wouldn't go in saying, I'm going to absolutely take 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers. Again, that's very dependent on what wide receivers and running backs we're talking about that you've already selected. We are up here at the 1. What is going on here? Oh, it's not in the draft room. That's embarrassing. Okay. Well, luckily we still have time with our picker. We're going to take Derrick Henry. But anyway, if you choose a certain number of players that you're planning on taking going into the draft, that's just going to affect your draft negatively because it's very, if you get Darren Waller, you probably only need a second tight end. You probably don't need 3. But if you wait until the tier that has like, Dawson Knox and Who's just below that? Well, let's check it out here. If you wait until you get this range with like Dawson Knox, Ertz, Freiermuth, Gesicki, Albert O, I think at that point you probably are going to need 3 tight ends. So just see how the draft falls and don't reach too much because it's going to put you at a disadvantage against the larger field. It might put you at an advantage against the other 11 competitors in this draft, but it's going to put you at a disadvantage in regard to the 450,000 people in the tournament as a whole. Okay, so we're 12 picks away here from our second selection, and we're just going to have to wait a few minutes and see how this falls. And kind of get an idea here of the players that are likely to be there for you in the second round. You know, obviously, if a guy like Najee Harris could make it to us, we would certainly select him, but he's not going to make it 9 more picks. Yeah, he goes right there. Tyreek Hill, there's a lot of interesting players this year in regard to talent versus situation. Of course, Tyreek Hill is a highly talented player. We don't yet know what kind of production he can have outside of a Patrick Mahomes-led offense. I'm sure he's going to be productive, but I'm not confident enough to be taking him this high in a draft. If there's any situation this summer where he slides a little bit and he's more of an early 3rd round pick, I'm comfortable with that. Or, you know, obviously he could slide on a case-by-case basis. But a 17.5 ADP is just a little rich for me. CeeDee Lamb, I have no problem taking. Debo, I really have no problem taking. I think he's more than likely to end up back on the 49ers at this point. You know, I guess something could still happen, but the way that's fallen, it seems like he's going to be back in San Francisco for another season. And honestly, even if he wasn't in San Francisco, that's the type of player I don't have as much concern about. You know, he's dynamic enough that I think he would probably carve out a nice role for himself in any offense that he finds himself in. So I'm not even concerned, even if he did change teams. I talked just a minute ago about how much I love A.J. Brown. That very well could be the pick here in the second round for me. But Nick Chubb is right there. And I definitely view Nick Chubb as an elite second tier running back. And I think he would probably be the last guy in that tier for me. All right. A.J. Brown or Nick Chubb? I think I'm going to take Nick Chubb. It's right at ADP for him. There's an outside chance A.J. Brown could still be there on my next pick in 6 selections. You know, I also could have gone A.J. Brown there and hoped that Aaron Jones made it to me, which he likely would have. But these are the decisions you have to make in the moment. And I don't know that there's a wrong answer. Chubb and A.J. Brown are both elite players. It really just comes down to the construction of the team. And we'll see where we go in round 3 here. It's almost certainly got to be a receiver in round 3 for us. One of the things a minute ago, you know, I didn't realize I wasn't in the draft room. And I know this is like blasphemy in the best ball community. Not only do I prefer short drafts, which a lot of people don't, I also prefer to do it on mobile, which I know everyone thinks is like amateur hour, but you know, I'm used to it. I think it's a pretty strong mobile experience. I don't mind doing these drafts on my phone at all. So I'm showing a bit of my inexperience on the desktop version of the site. All right, T. Higgins. You know, I know Jamar Chase is the guy with the hype at this point, highly touted coming out of college. You know, he comes to the NFL and they immediately go to the Super Bowl. I think T. Higgins is right there, 1A, 1B with Jamar Chase, and I think it's a bit of a value to get him 2 rounds later. On any given week, I think it's about an equal opportunity that Higgins or Jamar Chase could be the one putting up the big numbers. Really dynamic number 2 wide receiver. And for our team, he will be the number 1 wide receiver since we skipped A.J. Brown this go round. So you can see here, Kyle Pitts, you'll notice here his ADP, or it doesn't matter. Patrick Mahomes' ADP is 35.1. And then when you see the person selecting, the team selecting at the top here, it's going to tell you not only it's the 3.9 pick, round 3, pick 9, but it's also going to tell you the overall pick. That's the number to the right. That's what allows you to keep a good a good understanding of who's slipping and who's a good value at any given point in the draft. I will certainly be using the queue where you star players and make them easier for yourself to keep track of and draft later. I'm just not sure who those players are going to be yet because, again, I need to see how these first few rounds play out, and then we can kind of get an idea for which direction we're going to go with this team and which type of stacks we might be targeting. Another thing that you can do on Underdog, and I would recommend doing, is setting your own rankings. That's not something I've done to this point because it's been so early in the tournament that there's been a lot of interesting things happening with ADP, and I really wanted to see sort of the natural evolution of that as people played and made it a more efficient average draft position. But as the summer proceeds, I certainly will do my own rankings, or I'll combine my rankings with some experts, some of the DFS sites that do best ball rankings. I'll probably end up with some sort of hybrid of my personal feelings and their rankings, and I will upload those. And at that point, my order of players will actually be my rankings, not the ADP rankings. This is the part of the draft where you either need to decide if you're going to take a top end tight end or if you're going to wait until those middle rounds and take a couple. I think that decision's really already been made for us with George Kittle going off the board, because now we're at the next tier, which is Hawkinson, Goddard, Schultz. We can certainly wait on those guys. I think we're probably going to go wide receiver again here. This is also the place to consider if you're going to take, a tier 1 or tier 2 quarterback, which generally I don't. But if they fall to me, I will. But again, I think more than likely we're probably going wide receiver here in round 4. And there's a couple guys I really love. Michael Pittman being one of them who just got drafted. So he's not going to be on the board for us. But Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, obviously, if he was healthy, would be going earlier than this. I really need to do a deep dive on some of these players that have been injured this offseason and see where they are in the recovery. Obviously, some of these guys will be ready for training camp. Some of them will be ready for week 1. And some of them are likely going to miss some time. And I don't have a great grasp on that right now as far as where some of these injured players are in the recovery at this point. I really hope this guy doesn't take McLaurin. I'd love to get McLaurin here. That's certainly my number 1 target. And he takes Marquise Brown. So we're certainly going to go with Terry McLaurin since he's available to us. And now we'll bring back all the positions. We're about to be in what a lot of people refer to as the running back dead zone. Historically, there's a lot of these running backs in these rounds who seemingly might have okay opportunity, but it's a fragile situation or they're a fragile talent level. I think there is some validity to that. I think you might want to avoid drafting too many of these guys too frequently. Doesn't mean none of them will hit, but I do think it's a risk, and the data would show over the years that you don't want to be taking a lot of running backs in this range. I would make an exception personally for J.K. Dobbins. I think that's someone that the fantasy community maybe has been a little bit out of sight, out of mind. 46. It's a little bit of value on Godwin. I think I'm going to take it. There's a lot of moments like this throughout a draft, throughout drafting season, where there's something that sort of seems like the clear right play. The only reason Godwin is even available there, again, is because of injury. We know he's a talented player. We know he's in a high-flying offense. I'm not necessarily excited to take him. He's not a young guy that's on the rise. He is coming off an injury. But sometimes there's just, it just seems like the solid pick. It just seems like the solid right pick. It's not the most exciting, but I think that's the kind of guy you want to take a chance on in round 5, And again, a lot of guys I like in this range of wide receivers. Really, I could probably go another position in the next round if I wanted to, just because this range right here, Devontae Smith, Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is like perennially the most underrated fantasy player each and every year. Seems like it's setting up to happen again this year. Robert Woods. I mean, Do we not think Robert Woods is a talented guy? Do we not think he is the number one wide receiver in Tennessee? Why is he going so much later than some of these other guys that are clearly the number 2 or even number 3 guys on their teams? Allen Robinson. Happily take Allen Robinson at his new home in LA. Cortland Sutton. Significant upgrade at quarterback. I love this range of wide receivers. So I could just double dip and take a few in the next couple rounds, but it also allows me, if I want to sneak in one more other position here, I could. But with Hurts off the board, I was contemplating I might go with him at quarterback, and then I could consider going with Smith to start a stack in Philadelphia. But that's obviously not possible now. So I think listen, I'm very happy with Allen Robinson here. So, of course, he immediately gets sniped. That's what happens when you talk about players out loud. I'm not as excited about Cortland Sutton here, but I'm okay with him there. I'm still okay with Smith even without Jalen Hurts. As you remember, he was my highest owned player 17 drafts into the season. We are approaching value territory on Joe Burrow, and we do have T. Higgins already, and Cortland Sutton just went off the board. Burrow's gone too. So this is why you don't go into a draft with a plan. Even once you develop a plan, mid-draft, it's very hard to execute this stuff, and this is why you don't want to reach, because there's going to be value dropping when your guys keep getting selected. I know it's frustrating. It can be super frustrating, but you just have to pivot. You have to get out of the mindset of the stack you thought you were doing and pivot to potentially a new one. I could also consider a Tom Brady selection here to pair him up with Godwin, but I think I'm going to proceed with Devonta Smith. And we'll just go ahead and bump that ownership percentage up a little bit higher. All right, so we're sitting at 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers. I would say that's relatively typical for me, 6 rounds in. Occasionally, I might have taken a tight end, or I might have taken a quarterback if one fell to me. But that's a pretty standard distribution for me, 6 rounds in. Things frozen up here. It looks like, there we go. So when you're thinking about what stack might be, what might make sense, and again, I think stacks in general do make a lot of sense. Cincinnati, Burrow's off the board. Washington, we could certainly go get him at the end of the draft. Godwin, Brady just went. Philadelphia, already gone. So the only stack possibilities here, or the only singular stack possibility so far, is Washington. Definitely the majority of my drafts end up with a stack, and oftentimes one stack and maybe another mini stack. But you don't have to. You don't have to. And I think sometimes the draft board just falls a certain way where you're not able to stack and still be optimal because you're going to have to do too many weird things to make it happen. Man, we burned through that. We burned through that range of wide receivers I liked pretty quickly. But Robert Woods is perfectly fine for me right here. And that does open up a stack possibility with Tannehill as well. So we'll start to look at that. This is a good place to regroup. We're 7 picks in. We're 15 picks away from our next selection. So this is a good way to really use these opportunities to survey and really regroup going into your next pick. Because none of these top players available right now are going to beat us in 15 picks. But we can really start to look strategically at how we think the back half of this draft is going to go for us. One thing I know a lot of people think about and wonder about is how much they should be paying attention to what the other drafters are doing with their teams. I personally have found that's pretty difficult to do, at least to do it well. I think it's very helpful that you can see the number of players they've already selected here at the very top of the draft. For example, DFS Viper has done 2 quarterbacks, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers, and hasn't taken a tight end. That sort of information can be helpful if it's a situation like we have right here, where when we make a selection at the end of one round, our next pick is 6 picks away. So, like, let's say we're contemplating a tight end versus a quarterback, and the next 4 out of the next 6 players already have a quarterback. Well, in that situation, maybe you go tight end because there's a slightly higher chance that the quarterback will slip through to you 6 picks later. Certainly no science there. It often does not play out that way. You can look at the information. You can try and predict what your opponents are going to do. But I think if you spend too much time doing that, it takes away from what you're doing. Again, I'm sure there are more capable people out there at this than I, and do a better job with it. And if they can really have a good gauge for what their opponents are doing and keep track of their own draft, kudos to them. And I'm sure that can be an advantage. I just don't find for myself that it's been something sustainable. All right, so we're 7 picks away. Let's do a quick team recap here as we consider our next pick. So running back, we have Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, 2 super strong running backs. We really don't need to add any more running backs for a while. If someone that we really like slips or is slipping, we might consider it. But otherwise, I think we just backfill that running back room with guys at the end of the draft. And in fact, I might only take 2 more. This seems like a definite 4 running back team to me, just starting off with those 2 guys. All right, at wide receiver, we have Higgins, McLaurin, Godwin, Smith, and Woods. A lot of wide receiver 1s on their own team, which I like. I always like having wide receiver 1s on their own team, although ironically, our first selection, T. Higgins, is not necessarily that. But we probably do need to consider tight end soon-ish, but it's still that same range we were talking about a minute ago. I'm totally fine drafting Brandon Ayuk. I think I'm fine drafting Christian Kirk, and I do think that could be another stack possibility with Trevor Lawrence down the line. Kenneth Walker is an interesting player, and I can already tell he's going to be a very interesting rookie in drafts all summer because it feels like there's a wide variance of opinion on what he's likely to do in Seattle. I think some people are very high on him, and I can't argue that there's certainly a scenario where there's a path to playing time for him, a lot of playing time. But I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know that he's much of a pass catcher. I don't know that Seattle's going to be very good anytime soon. So I'm not going to be the one to select him here. At this point for me, I think it comes down to either Christian Kirk. I wouldn't mind taking Tony Pollard, but I don't think that's a need right now just based on the 2 running backs we already have. So I'm going to go with Christian Kirk. If Pollard's still there when we select again, I would consider it. Chase Claypool, I'm still high on. I know he hasn't had much production. Certainly not last year, but I think I'm still a believer. I think I want to see one more season out of him with yet again a subpar quarterback situation, but want to see one more year. Obviously, Juju is in Kansas City now. Man, Lazard, Claypool, and Pollard all went, which all would have been considerations. Clock's going to be tight on this one. I'm going to go ahead and start a layer. Yeah, man, sometimes it just falls like this where there's just not a pick you're stoked about regardless of position. And it just so happened a lot of guys that I'm high on went right before my selection there. Claypool, Lazard, and Pollard are all guys I've been targeting. And so yeah, it's a bit disappointing. But a little bit of value on CEH, 10 picks beyond ADP. And again, I can't say that I'm a huge believer in CEH, but I do think there are some reasons to believe he might have his best NFL season to date this season. There's a couple different ways to go about best ball. Some people are player take people. They're all about saying, I think the market is too high on this guy or too low on that guy. And well, essentially we're all doing that, right? We're all doing that to some degree. I guess it depends on why we're doing that. Some people do that because they've watched a lot of tape and they have a strong opinion about a player, either that they are undervalued or overvalued. Mine tends to be more about just the strategic. I don't have as many player takes. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the skill. I don't have the time. I don't have basically any of the skills it takes to be good at that part of it. I watch games on Sunday, right? I watch all the games, or at least part of all the games. I certainly see things that I take note of mentally, that I think is some version of player evaluation, but not nearly to the level that a lot of people do. Then there's a whole nother camp that I would say I fall into, which is looking at this more as a game theory game. And it has more to do with roster construction and value and when you draft, not only when in the season you draft, but sometimes even like what time of day you draft. I've been in some drafts at 2 a.m, not because I stayed up for them, but because I'm a night owl already. And I definitely feel that I've been in some drafts with some people consuming large amounts of alcohol. And to some degree, that can be an advantage in its own right. So I like to look at it that way. I like to look at it as like, what if this happens? What if Jimmy Garoppolo is actually still the starter in San Francisco, even though we all assume he's not? Because you can get him for free at the end of this draft. What do I think the chances are that first of all, that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the starter, and that even if he is, he's going to put up big fantasy numbers. Odds are against both those things. But if you can allow yourself to be in that multiverse for one draft and draft everything according to like, what if this does happen? It's most likely not going to. But if it does happen, and if you correctly correlate what could happen as a ripple effect if that does happen, and you're right, that's how you can beat 500,000 people in a tournament. By having a different opinion than the field, owning it, and doubling down on it. It's a little early. It's a little early for Albert O, but I'm not blown away by anybody ahead of him here. And we need to get a tight end. So a bit of a reach. But you know what's interesting? I like to look at my team at the end like this. So Derrick Henry ADP of 4, I took him at 4. Nick Chubb ADP of 21, I took him at 21. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I gained 10 picks of value. Not massive, but a little bit. T. Higgins, I gained 3 picks of value. McLaurin, I gave up 1 pick of value. Godwin, I gained 6. You can see this all the way down. There's no perfect formula to this, but I find that if I can be around 0 or ultimately in the negative, meaning I gained value in my overall picks, that's generally where I want to be. And that also allows me occasionally to reach up a little bit, around on a player like Alberto. That doesn't feel great to do, but you need a tight end. I don't love Gesicki. Gronkowski might actually be retiring. I mean, I know everyone's sort of assuming he's coming back. And if he is, this is too low of a draft position for him. But I'm not sure he is coming back. He already retired once. And it might be permanent this time. I think I saw a video of him last week doing Gronk things, Vegas draft party. He didn't look like someone that wanted to come back to me. He looked like someone that wanted to stay in Vegas. So, of course, that's purely anecdotal, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure he's coming back. I'm going to say all that, and then I'm going to have to select him with a pick here. One thing to consider at least, Madison is the kind of guy that I would feel really good about being my last running back if I only went with 4. Yeah. I don't see any wide receivers I love in this range. All right, so we're going to go with Madison. That's going to be our last running back. So we're going to go with Henry, Chubb, CEH, and Madison. We're going to need another tight end in pretty short order, and we're definitely going to need a quarterback sooner than later. So I'm going to go ahead and star Tannehill between the stackability. Actually, I have Derrick Henry too. I forgot that they started actually passing him the ball last year. So that actually factors into this stack as well. If I have Henry and Woods already, I think I definitely want to get Tannehill if I can. And of course, Tannehill, has some ability with his legs as well. So that always is helpful. But I've put myself in a position here where I'm going to have to take a couple quarterbacks and at least one more tight end in pretty short order just because I waited on these guys. And now we're going to have to make up in quantity what we didn't get in quality at the top tiers of those two positions. You guys still with me here? We're a little past halfway on this draft. We got 7 rounds to go. I think we have a pretty good vision for how we want that to play out. If we wanted to do a secondary Washington stack, yeah, we could get Wentz. We could get Wentz. Yeah, I was just thinking about the possibilities here. So we could get Wentz. If we wanted to get Logan Thomas, we could. And even though I said we already drafted our last running back, we could consider taking McKissick the very end. That would be a relatively decent Washington stack. But again, just be careful not to overstack these teams. If you want to select like 4 or 5, I don't usually go that high, but if you wanted to select 4 or 5 like Buffalo Bills, honestly, I don't think I would even go that high with a team like that. I just like, short stacks, skinny stacks, quarterback plus 1 receiver, 1 running back, maybe 2 receivers, maybe 1 receiver, 1 tight end, like just simple. Don't overdo it. Don't over leverage one team too much. I don't think that's optimal in this large of a tournament. There are weeks where it could be great for you. It would be great for you. But you're just too dependent on that team hitting once you hit the playoffs. And if that team doesn't hit in week 15, 16, 17, it was kind of all for naught, in my opinion. So if I'm not willing to do it with the Bills, I certainly shouldn't be willing to do it with the Commanders. I don't know that I want to end up with like 4 or 5 Washington players, but we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. I don't have to make a decision on that right now because all those players are a little bit further down the board. Tannehill ADP of 152. We're selecting at 141. If we took him right here, that would be about a 1 round reach. Okay, so let's do what I said earlier. Let's look at who has quarterbacks behind us. They all do. And some of them have 2. So could we sneak in one more pick here before we take Tannehill? Should we take the gamble on Gronk? Just talked about how worried I am that he may actually be retired. But if he does come back, see, this is the sort of thing why when you draft in May, I guess these are the shots you have to take, right? Because by August, we'll know. Either he will be back, he'll be in training camp, and he'll be being drafted in the top 5 tight ends, or he'll be retired, and this will be a waste of a pick. But as I said earlier, the whole point of drafting right now is to get value that you're not going to be able to get later. So Gronk in the 12th round on the chance that he comes back and is still a primary target for TB12. I talked myself into it. I think those are the shots you take when you're drafting in May. And then this next one's a no doubter. If Tannehill is still there for us, we're going to select him. And he is. All right, so we have 5 picks left. And here's where we stand. We have Tannehill at quarterback, Henry, Chubb, CEH, and Madison at running back, Higgins, McLaurin, Godwin, Smith, Woods, and Kirk, Albert O, and Gronk. I'm sure Trevor Lawrence is not going to make it back to us. But if he did, I would be perfectly happy taking him as our second quarterback. I'm going to go ahead and start Wentz here too, so we can be thinking about that. I'm not going to even look at running back because it doesn't matter to us at this point. This is a rough stretch of wide receivers. Now, I like Donovan Peoples-Jones. If we did go with Trevor Lawrence, we could also add Marvin Jones or Laviska. I like Nico Collins, as you saw from my ownership percentages. And I like Isaiah McKenzie. So there's maybe 7 or 8 wide receivers ahead of the guys that I like or that I prefer. I think this is definitely a 3 tight end team. A, because we waited so long to take our first one, and B, because Gronk may not play. Now, again, I'm hedging bets against my own draft when I do that, which is not something you want to do. You know, if Gronk does retire, can this team still compete? So this is where it goes from like macro to micro, because if Gronk gets hurt, I mean, he was my 13th round pick. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't necessarily sink your team. It's not good if you're going to try and win it all. But it doesn't hurt you that much in regard to just winning this league. And then, you know, you get to the playoffs, who knows what happens. So, like, okay, let me further explain what I'm thinking on that. So what I'm saying is, let's say Gronkowski does retire. He doesn't play at all this season. So this was a wasted pick, essentially. That alone happening, regardless of what else I do with this team, probably hurts my chances a lot of being a top contender. But if he doesn't play and I select a third tight end, that could be enough to still, you know, solidify me enough at tight end for me to win this league and get to the playoffs. And as I said, see what happens. These are the things you got to consider. On the flip side, Gronk does come back, is great, was a great value pick there. You know, if the rest of my team was drafted well, should be able to compete with anybody, right? These are the unknowns. You got to weigh these things out for yourself and decide which way you want to go based on all the information at your disposal. Lawrence actually might make it back to us here. I don't think this player is going to take a quarterback. They already have 2. Just checking out their team a little bit here. All right. Is there that big a difference between Wentz and Lawrence? Maybe. Maybe there is. Maybe there is. LaVisca and Marvin are both still there. So is Logan Thomas. I'm gonna let it select Lawrence. I'm gonna go with it. This is probably a 3 quarterback team anyway, you know. So I can take Wentz. Then it'll be Tannehill, Lawrence, and Wentz. You know, do those 3 guys equal one Patrick Mahomes? Maybe. That's the idea, right? 15, 16, 17, 18. 4 picks remaining. So we want 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, and then 2 receivers. So that would put us at 3, 4, 8, 3. 3, 4, 8, 3. I think this early in the season, that's not a bad Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I make the right decision here. I think at this point in the drafting season, that's not a bad quantity of players. I guess we're just gonna go Wentz here, man. It gets tough in these rounds. Oh, I lost some value there on Wentz. not a ton, but I picked him at 172. His ADP was 188. Yeah, it's getting a little ugly here. I feel like a few days ago when this first launched, there were still some really exciting players at this point in the draft, but ADP is shaken out and it's gotten to the point that it will be, of course there will be risers and fallers, but it's more or less gotten to the point it will be for the rest of the summer, which is that once you get to these rounds, there's not necessarily a lot of guys you're stoked about. Big questions on all of them. And again, doesn't mean these guys can't perform. I mean, Julio Jones, massive performer in the past, not even on a team right now. Laviska Shenault, a lot of believers still out there. I mean, I might take him here. But you're not necessarily excited to take these guys. I like taking McKenzie at the end. Star Visca. Still need one more tight end. So, since we have Lawrence, I think Ingram makes sense as our third tight end if he's still available. And he's already passed his ADP, so we're not reaching. I like both those young wide receivers as flyers at the end here. If it just went like this, Ingram, Nico, Laviska, I would be perfectly happy with that to end this draft. I don't know that it will because they all have ADPs right around the range we're in right now. I need to get at least one of Ingram or Shenault. Well, do I? Maybe I don't. I have Christian Kirk. I think that would make me more excited to get Ingram. Maybe unQ Shenault. What do you guys think? What should I be doing here? I know a lot of people don't like the 3 quarterback or 3 tight end builds. I tend to agree with you. I don't think it's ultimately optimal, but again, I'm drafting before we even know the bye weeks, before anyone has started training camp. I just think to not end up with 100% dead teams from this era of drafting, I think it's okay to take 3 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends, especially when you don't have a top end guy in either group. All right, 2 picks remaining. I think they're both going to be wide receivers. So let's look at wide receiver. Higgins, McLaurin, Godwin, Smith, Woods, Kirk. Does feel a little light. I mean, those are all guys I like, but it does feel a little light. You know what? AJ Green, man. This is a great example, right? So don't get bogged down in your ideas. AJ Green is someone you could not have paid me to draft the last 2 years. And, not that he was a really high draft pick last year. He was the year before that still. Nico's off the board. But it's weird. It's a weird thing that's happened now. We're at the end of his career. He's in Arizona. DeAndre Hopkins is serving a suspension. And I think AJ Green in the 17th round is actually a somewhat exciting pick. And I'm going to take it. But that's just one of those, man. I would not have believed I would do that a year ago. Been excited to pick AJ Green in 2022. All right. So Sterling Shepard, again, injured, can be a productive player when he's in there. I think this last round pick is usually best suited for like a guy, a young guy, a high upside guy, a dart throw, but potential guy. And I kind of feel like that might be Terrace Marshall. I really do. There was some hype coming in last year. Obviously, the team disappointed. But I don't know that he's not a second-year breakout candidate, just like Nico. Just double check, make sure there's no other like stack considerations we should be thinking about here. I don't think so. We got 2 Titans. We got 2 Jaguars. I guess we only have 1 Commander, but that's probably fine. I could still go back. I assume McKissick is still there. I haven't seen him go. You see that? As soon as you say the guy's name out loud. All right, we're 11 picks away from our last selection in this draft. I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, this is actually the first draft I've ever done on camera before. It does add another element to it. There's more to consider as you're trying to talk out loud and ensure everything's recording. And so, but I'll get more used to it. I'm going to do a handful of these throughout the summer. I'm going to continue to share my player exposure so that you know which players I'm targeting, what trends I'm seeing. And, I'm going to enter what, a lot of people refer to it as like a barbell or a dumbbell barbell strategy, where essentially, if you looked at it as a graph, as far as how many drafts you're doing, and you can only do 150 total, I'm doing a bunch right here in the beginning, right? So the graph is high, then it's going to come down and plateau throughout the summer. And I'll probably do, maybe 7 or 8 drafts a week. So like obviously about 1 a day, I guess, on average. And then as we get towards the end of the summer, there's a couple reasons you want to draft heavily at the end of the summer or right before this tournament fills, whenever that happens. One is obviously you have all the information. You have at least all the information right up until the season kicks off. Players will still get injured, but there's nothing you can do about that. You've seen everything that's happened over the summer. But also, historically, the end of these drafts tend to get more casual players right before the season starts. And so you're drafting against less skilled competition. You see some crazy things happen sometimes. And all of these are micro advantages, but you get enough micro advantages and they become meaningful. All right. Well, the decision was taken out of our hands. I think we really need to go wide receiver here anyway, but our running back was selected by another team. So we're going to take a roll of the dice on Marshall and hope that he can have a bit of a breakout in year 2. That's going to do it for this draft, guys. Appreciate you joining me for it. Let's go ahead and recap the team real quick before we sign off. Tannehill, Lawrence, Wentz, Henry, Chubb, CEH, Madison, Higgins, McLaurin, Godwin, Smith, Woods, Kirk, AJ Green, Terrace Marshall. At tight end, we got Albert O, Gronk, and Evan Ingram. I would say on the whole, this is a relatively common type of team for me. Common type of players, common quantity of positions. And I get crazy sometimes. I'll definitely go with some high-end quarterbacks early in the draft sometimes. Same with tight end. Sometimes I go with only 2 of those positions. I do a lot of different things, but the way this one fell was relatively typical for the way I like to draft, for what it's worth. So get out there and try yourself. I hope to see you in the draft room. My name on Underdog is 12 Fluid Ounces. You can also follow me on Twitter at 12 Fluid. Thank you, guys.